As a licensed car insurance agent at Jerry, a question I often get is, what is the difference between full coverage and state minimum? The short answer is a lot. State minimum coverage is just the basic bare bones coverage you need for your car to be street legal. This is usually a certain amount of liability coverage which only pays for damage to the other party if you are at fault in an accident. On the other hand, while the term full coverage is not a type of insurance policy, what people typically mean when they say this is that they have liability protection plus collision and comprehensive coverage. These three coverages combined cover your vehicle and cover you if your vehicle causes property damage or injuries to others. Let's review each of these types of insurance in more depth. What are state minimums? Almost every state requires all cars on the road to have a certain amount of liability insurance. Liability insurance offers financial protection from claims filed against your auto policy due to injuries and damages you have caused to other people and/or property. It will cover any legal costs and medical payments for the injured party. Bodily injury and property damage liability coverages are mandatory, but most other coverages are considered optional. Each state minimum requirements for liability insurance are different. For example, Alaska's state minimums are $50,000 per person and $100,000 per accident in bodily injury coverages and $50,000 in property damage. Pennsylvania's minimum liability insurance limits are much lower, with a bodily injury requirement of $15,000 per person and $30,000 per accident and $5,000 of property damage. Pennsylvania also requires all drivers to carry personal injury protection, which is sometimes referred to as PIP. Here's the really important part. Just because a state only requires a certain amount of insurance doesn't mean that amount will have you adequately covered in the case of an accident. Let's say you live in Iowa and only have the state minimums. Your car skids on some ice, you hit someone, and they are in the hospital for a week. Your insurance policy carries $20,000 of bodily injury coverage, but a week's stay in the hospital is $45,000, so you still owe them $25,000. Without any additional coverage, you'd have to pay that $25,000 out of pocket. It would have to come out of your savings, your future earnings, or your retirement. In the worst case scenario, you could be forced to sell your home. Even the property damage limits required in your state, which are often in the range of $15,000 or $25,000, won't cover much after a major accident. After all, the average price of a new car is $45,000. That said, as an insurance agent, I recommend that everyone carry the limits of $100, $300, $50 if possible. This is insurance speak for $100,000 in bodily injury liability per person, $300,000 in bodily injury liability per accident, and $50,000 in property damage liability per accident. And this amount of coverage doesn't have to cost a fortune. Increasing your liability limits sometimes only costs a few more dollars a month. What is full coverage? Full coverage is frequently used insurance term, but it is not actually a type of coverage. It can mean different levels of coverage to different insurance agents and companies. Typically, when people use the term full coverage, they mean a combination of liability coverage as well as coverage that pays for your car if it is damaged in a covered claim. This would include bodily injury, property damage, uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage, uninsured or underinsured motorist property damage, medical payments or personal injury protection, comprehensive, and collision. Certain limits of liability, collision, and comprehensive insurance meet the requirements that dealers and banks would require if you had a car loan. But you often need to purchase roadside assistance, rental reimbursement, and gap coverage separately. So always ask your insurance agent if you have all the coverages you may need and confirm you are not paying for anything you don't need. You can also review and update your coverage directly on the Jerry app so you can see in real time what you're paying each month. So again, what is the difference between state minimums and full coverage? To recap, there is a big difference between having only the required state minimum liability insurance and quote unquote full coverage. State minimums refer to the amount of liability coverage you must carry on your car insurance to drive legally. The state wants to make sure that you can cover the expenses if you damage property or cause bodily harm to another person or pedestrian. The amount of liability required is different for each state. Bodily injury, property damage, and sometimes medical payments coverage are required. But the state minimums won't cover your car after an at-fault collision. While the term full coverage is not an actual type of insurance, people typically use it to refer to a policy that has more than liability coverage. That may include comprehensive and collision coverage too. And sometimes people add towing and roadside assistance. If you need help figuring out what coverages are right for you or want to shop for a lower insurance rate, download the free Jerry app to contact one of our licensed insurance agents.